There's no good way to find out your wife is cheating, but some ways are worse than others. Learning about Lisa's affair from my own mother? That had to be the most humiliating way possible. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the added embarrassment of knowing my mother had been right all along. Before I married Lisa, my mom had warned me, practically begged me, to find a nice, traditional girl, preferably someone with our Italian roots. I didn't listen. And now, with cold, hard proof in her hands, she didn't even have to say, "I told you so." My name is Jake, and on that particular afternoon, I was picking up my 10-year-old son, Noah, from my mother's house. The moment I stepped inside, I saw her crying. My stomach dropped. The last time I'd seen my mother cry was a decade ago at my father's funeral. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to Noah, but then I spotted him in the corner, completely fine, playing on the brand new iPhone I had given him for his birthday 2 days earlier. So he's okay. Then it must be Lisa. Tears stung my own eyes as I asked, "Is Lisa all right?" My mother nodded but didn't speak. Instead, she gestured for me to sit down, then turned to Noah. "Sweetheart, why don't you go outside and play on the swing for a little while?" She gently took the phone from his hands before he could protest. Once we were alone, she let out a shaky breath. "After Lisa dropped off Noah, he showed me his new phone," she began. "He didn't mean to, but he recorded something." Confused, I watched as she pressed play on the screen. What I heard next changed my life forever. Lisa's voice filled the room, casual and carefree, as she spoke to a man named Brandon. They were planning a weekend trip to Las Vegas. She laughed as she said she'd tell me it was a business conference, while in reality, they'd be spending their days in bed and their nights drinking and gambling. She was on her way to his house now, she told him, dropping Noah off so she could have a clear schedule. Brandon's voice came next. "I'll meet you in 30 minutes. The key's still under the big planter. Just let yourself in." I felt my chest tighten, but the worst was yet to come. As the recording continued, Lisa and Brandon went on to discuss our future, except I wasn't in it. She had hired his lawyer to file for divorce against me. And not just a divorce. They were planning to destroy me. They laughed as they plotted. Lisa joked that when they got back from Vegas, she would tell me everything. Only I wouldn't have a choice in how it ended. She'd claim I beat her. Brandon would make sure she had a black eye to sell the story. I'd be arrested, thrown in jail, and stripped of everything. Our house, our money, even custody of our son. "I can already see it now," Lisa said, giggling. "Jake, locked up, becoming some guy named Bubba's new love interest in prison." Brandon chuckled. "And I'll be right here, living in his house, screwing his wife in his bed. His kid will call me Dad." The recording ended. I sat in stunned silence. Lisa had no idea her secret was out. No clue that I now knew the full depth of her betrayal. For a brief, fleeting moment, I actually considered reconciliation. What if she just stopped the affair right now? Could we fix this? But as quickly as that thought entered my mind, it vanished. This wasn't just cheating. This was an attack. This was war. I had spent 20 years believing Lisa loved me. But now, I saw the truth. She didn't just want to leave me. She wanted to ruin me. She wanted to take my son, my freedom, my dignity. She wasn't content with breaking my heart. She wanted to obliterate my entire life. And if that was the game she wanted to play, she was about to learn that I wasn't just some clueless, boring husband. She had underestimating me. And that was her biggest mistake. I felt my mother's gaze on me. When I looked at her, I saw the same fire burning in her eyes. "My boy," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "I want to wring that woman's neck." I swallowed hard. "What do I do, Ma?" "You stay out of jail," she said firmly. "You're not going to get yourself locked up for beating that scumbag within an inch of his life. You have to be smarter than them. You have to think about Noah." I took a deep breath and nodded. She was right. If I lashed out recklessly, I'd be playing right into their hands. Lisa wanted me to react emotionally. She wanted me to make a mistake. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I wasn't a tough guy. I didn't have a background in the military. I wasn't part of the mafia. And I didn't have some underground network of guys who could handle things for me. I was just a normal guy. I sold cars for a living. My biggest crime was speeding or occasionally rolling through a stop sign. I met Lisa in the most mundane way possible. She was a real estate agent, and I leased an apartment from her. A week later, we went to dinner. Soon after, she leased a car from me. It wasn't some grand love story, but for 19 and a half of our 20 years together, I thought we had a good marriage. I cooked for her. I learned from my mother, a chef, so I was damn good at it. I bought her flowers a couple of times a year. I gave her compliments because I knew she thrived on them. I was faithful. I rarely drank, and when I did, I never got wasted, except for that one New Year's Eve a decade ago. I wasn't a millionaire with a yacht, but I worked hard and provided a good life for my family. I spent time with my son, helped around the house. I thought I was a good husband, but apparently, none of that was enough for Lisa. I had never been the jealous type. I always thought guys who constantly checked their wives' phones and accused them of cheating were pathetic. But now, I realized, maybe they weren't so dumb after all. Lisa's affair had been going on for at least 6 months. How did I not see it? The late-night showings, the sudden weekend work trips. How could I have been so blind? I needed proof. On the drive home, I took a detour past Brandon's house. Sure enough, Lisa's car was parked right outside. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. By the time I got home, tears were burning in my eyes. I erased the recording from Noah's phone. He didn't need to be caught up in this mess. Then, I went to my bedroom, turned on the stereo to drown out the sound, and cried into my pillow for an hour. When I looked in the mirror afterward, my eyes were red and swollen. I took a long, scalding shower, scrubbing away the sting of betrayal. Lisa came home 2 hours later, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. She kissed me, and I noticed her hair was damp. She had showered, too. "Rough day?" she asked. "Got shampoo in my eyes," I muttered. She laughed. "Clumsy." I forced a smile. She had no idea what was coming, and I was going to make sure she never saw it coming. My mother's warning echoed in my mind. Don't use your guns. That was when the idea hit me. A plan for revenge. A way to turn the tables without ever pulling a trigger. I went down to the basement and unlocked my gun safe. Inside, I pushed aside my newer firearms, a Colt .45 and a Beretta 9mm. Both were registered, leaving a clear paper trail straight to me. Too risky. Instead, I reached for an old Browning .22 pistol, a relic inherited from my father, who had inherited it from his father. This gun had never been registered. No paperwork. No serial number in any database. It was invisible. Wearing latex gloves, I carefully disassembled it, wiping away any fingerprints from the barrel, slide, and grip. I even wiped down the bullets in the magazine before reassembling the weapon. Then, I took the remaining .22 caliber ammo, drove a mile away, and tossed it into a random dumpster. No ammo. No evidence I ever owned a .22. Next, I drove to a hardware store, one on the far side of town where I rarely shopped. I paid cash for a pack of industrial-strength zip ties, the kind strong enough to restrain a grown man. Just in case, I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. Cameras were everywhere these days. The plan was simple, but I needed luck. That night, I made a call to the Bakersfield Casino and Hotel, making a reservation in my name for the weekend. If things went sideways, I wanted an alibi. The next morning, I waited until Brandon left for work. Then, I used the spare key he had so generously told my wife about, hidden under the planter, to let myself into his condo. I went straight to his computer. On Yahoo and Google, I searched for all kinds of terrorist organizations and extremist groups. I clicked on articles, read up on radical ideologies, and let the browser history fill itself with damning evidence. I knew they planned to leave for their little Vegas getaway on Friday, which meant he'd be packing Thursday night. I had to make sure something extra ended up in that suitcase. But I still had one problem. I couldn't get into the trunk of his car, which meant I had to force him to take Lisa's car instead. Thursday night, I parked a block from Brandon's house, took a slow walk past his driveway, and punctured 2 of his tires. Not slashed. That would look too deliberate. Instead, I pressed a couple of nails into his fresh, clean tires and let time do the rest. By morning, Lisa's phone rang. It was Brandon. He needed a ride. Perfect. Lisa picked him up and drove him to work in her car, the same car I had a spare key for. During my lunch break, I parked a block away from her office. I opened the trunk of her car, popped open Brandon's suitcase, and, wearing rubber gloves, slipped the .22 and zip ties inside. Then, I shut everything up and went back to work. All I had to do now was wait. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Lisa. I answered. "Hey, babe." Her voice was frantic. "Jake, you have to help me. I need you to post bail and find a lawyer." I sat up straighter. "What the hell are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. I'm at the airport. I've been arrested. The TSA found a gun in Brandon's suitcase, and they think I'm involved." Jackpot. Trying to sound appropriately confused, I demanded, "Why are you at the airport? You said you were going to Bakersfield for work." Lisa stammered, scrambling for an answer. I cut her off, put the cop on the phone. A moment later, a TSA officer took over. "Sir, your wife was with a man attempting to board a plane with a firearm and zip ties in his luggage. Both have been detained and are being transferred to federal holding for further investigation." I let out a long sigh. "I see. Thank you, officer." I hung up. I think you can guess what happened next. I didn't post bail. I didn't hire a lawyer. Her parents did. At trial, Lisa and Brandon's defense was obvious. They claimed I planted the evidence after discovering their affair. Easy to accuse, hard to prove. The prosecution wasted no time dismantling their story. First, they presented Brandon's search history, pages and pages of extremist content, terrorist organizations, and radical ideologies. The defense tried to argue I had planted those searches. But then they had to explain how I supposedly guessed where Brandon hid his house key. Even their own lawyer looked skeptical. On the stand, I played the role of the naive, heartbroken husband. Lisa's attorney grilled me about my gun collection. I admitted to owning 2 firearms, a .45 and a 9mm. When asked if I had ever owned a .22, I shook my head. Never. The police had already searched my gun safe. Nothing but my registered weapons. No trace of a .22. No record of me ever purchasing one. The U.S. attorney handling the case did her homework. She pulled up my time card, showing I was at work the entire day the evidence was supposedly planted. Then, she presented Lisa's iPhone. It was password protected, with no spyware, proving I couldn't have been monitoring her conversations. Finally, she introduced a report from AAA Auto Club. Scott's tires hadn't been slashed. They had been punctured by nails. Just bad luck. One by one, their arguments crumbled. Lisa's attorney tried a different approach. "If you knew your wife was cheating, why didn't you take money out of your accounts? Cancel her credit cards? Change your will or life insurance?" I shrugged. "Because I didn't know. If I had, I would have divorced her, or at least hired a private investigator. But I trusted my wife. I was an idiot." The jury bought it. Lisa and Brandon were both found guilty. Brandon got 10 years. Lisa got 2 for conspiracy. When the verdict was read, Lisa collapsed, sobbing as 2 bailiffs dragged her away. Brandon lost it, trying to break free, screaming that he would kill me. He held up his fingers like a gun, mouthing, "Bang, bang." I smirked and gave him a single-finger salute. Take a wild guess which finger. 2 days later, the young U.S. attorney who prosecuted the case asked me to lunch. She introduced me to her sister, Rachel, a 5th-grade teacher. Rachel was sweet. Beautiful, too. We went on a few dates, but I wasn't ready. My heart was still too full of anger, too poisoned by betrayal. I told her I needed time. She understood. In the end, Lisa got exactly what she deserved. She didn't take me for everything in a divorce. I took her for everything instead. I had regrets. Not about what I did, but about what they forced me to do. If they hadn't tried to take my son away, I wouldn't have gone scorched earth. But they did. And I made sure I struck first. 6 months later, my divorce was final. Lisa got nothing. I took Noah to visit her in prison once. He was so traumatized that I never took him again. They write letters, but that's it. One night, I picked up the phone and called Rachel. We started seeing each other again. I don't know where it's going yet, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a future again. I was never good with women, so when a girl as stunning as Anastasia sat down next to me in the college cafeteria, I did what any socially awkward guy would do. I put my foot right in my mouth. Why are you talking to me instead of all the handsome guys over there? I blurted out, nodding toward a group of objectively better-looking guys at the next table. She smirked. Because I have a weakness for intelligent men. I nearly forgot how to breathe. She was mesmerizing. Long, jet-black hair, dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through me, and a poised confidence that was both alluring and slightly terrifying. She wore a silk Chinese-style dress, deep crimson with a golden fire-breathing dragon printed on the back. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a noir film. Beautiful, mysterious, and maybe just a little dangerous. I should have run the other way, but instead, I fell in love. I could count on one finger the number of women who had ever flirted with me, and she was it. There was something off about Anastasia, though, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She had an accent I couldn't place, but she refused to tell anyone where she was from. At least once a week, she'd disappear for a few hours, never explaining where she went. Sometimes, I felt less like her boyfriend and more like an obligation. Like she was babysitting me instead of dating me. But then there were moments when she'd let her guard down, and I'd catch a glimpse of something real, something vulnerable. For our 2-month anniversary, I bought us rollerblades. I figured it would be a fun way to spend time together, something lighthearted. When I gave them to her, she reacted as if I had handed her the keys to a Ferrari. "I've always wanted these," she exclaimed, eyes lighting up like a child on Christmas morning. We skated along the beach, hand in hand. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly excited, unguarded. That night, something changed between us. That was also the night we first slept together. "There's a first time for everything," she whispered. "Let me teach you." She did, and I passed the test. Things were great for 6 weeks. I didn't have much money to spend on her, but she never seemed to care. Her wardrobe alone probably cost more than my car, but she never complained when I took her on free dates, to the zoo, the Griffith Observatory, museums. I wanted to take her home to meet my parents. But then, one night, everything changed. We had gone to a play in downtown Los Angeles. Anastasia looked breathtaking, her hair pinned up with a long, sharp Chinese-style hairpin. After the show, I parked a few blocks away to avoid paying for parking. That's when we saw them. 3 large men, waiting by my car. I froze. Anastasia didn't. She laughed. The men weren't amused. One held a pair of handcuffs. The other 2 pulled guns. I barely had time to react before I heard the gunshots. Anastasia had been holding something in her coat pocket, her own gun. She fired through her coat, hitting one man in the chest and the other 2 in their heads. The one still standing lunged at her, knocking the gun from her hand. Without hesitation, she turned, kicked him in the face, then yanked the long, sharp hairpin from her hair and drove it into his neck. He gurgled, choking on his own blood. She calmly retrieved her gun from the ground. Then, as he gasped his last breath, she put another bullet in his head. A nondescript van screeched away from the curb, disappearing into the night. Anastasia barely reacted. She took my hand and pulled me toward my car. "Damn," she muttered. "Ruined my coat." I could barely process what had just happened. Who are you?" I stammered. She smiled. "Just a girl who was mugged once and decided never to let it happen again." I wasn't buying it. As we drove away, she made a phone call, whispering something that sounded like, "Clean up," 2 blocks south of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. I sat there, stunned. If this was just a mugging, why did one of them have handcuffs? I had been raised by a Quaker mother, taught to value peace and nonviolence. But here I was, in love with a woman who had just executed 3 men without blinking. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with my emotions. In the morning, I made my decision. "I'll never tell anyone what happened," I told her. "But I can't do this. I can't be with you." For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. Her dark eyes glistened as she kissed me one last time. "I really did love you, you know." Then I packed my suitcase and left. As I walked to my car, I heard her whisper, "I really did love you." I sat in my car and cried for half an hour before driving away. We saw each other in class every day after that, but we never spoke again. In the cafeteria, I sat with friends. She always sat alone, exactly 100 feet away. I missed her. but I was also terrified of her. A week later, I went rollerblading alone, lost in thought. That's when I collided, quite literally, with another girl. She had lost her balance and took me down with her. My jeans were torn, but neither of us were hurt. We both just lay there laughing. "Let me buy you a coffee to make up for it," she offered. I accepted immediately. Her name was Lana. Over coffee, she told me about her family. Her father and mother were both police officers. When I told her my dad was a scientist and my mom was a Quaker schoolteacher, she was fascinated. I'd love to meet them. She did. That night, we had dinner with my parents. She spoke with my father as much as she spoke with me, asking questions about his work. At one point, she even asked if we could visit his lab. My dad chuckled and took a sip of wine. "If I told you, I'd have to kill you," he joked, quoting Top Gun. We all laughed. Lana and I weren't a grand passion like Anastasia and I had been, but she was kind, funny, and affectionate. Maybe love didn't have to be so dramatic. Maybe this could be enough. A few nights later, Lana invited me to a jazz club. She had 2 tickets and seemed excited to go. I met her outside the club, and when we walked in, 2 of her male friends were already waiting for us. They were nice enough, though their names were impossible to pronounce. They hung on my every word, laughed at all my jokes. Lana couldn't keep her hands off me. I should have been having the time of my life, but something felt off. They kept ordering drinks, making sure my glass was never empty. I drank too much, way more than I usually did. By the time we left, I could barely stand. Then, everything went black. I was too drunk to drive, and I knew it. So when Lana and her friends offered to give me a ride, I didn't argue. They guided me toward a plain white panel van parked at the curb. My head was spinning, and I had to stop for a moment to catch my breath. Lana slid open the side door while her 2 friends nudged me forward. Not exactly forceful, but insistent. That's when the gunfire started. 3 deafening blasts tore through the night. I knew that sound. A .357 Magnum. Anastasia. Before I could even turn around, Lana and one of the guys were missing their heads. The 3rd man hit the ground, pulling a gun from his waistband. He aimed it directly at Anastasia. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, forcing the barrel of his gun into his own chest. My hands clenched around his, pushing his finger onto the trigger. A gunshot rang out. He went limp instantly. I staggered backward, while rising in my throat. I had just killed a man. A Quaker had just killed a man. I collapsed to my knees and vomited into the gutter. Anastasia barely flinched. She stepped over the bodies, calmly administering an insurance round to each of the corpses, ensuring they wouldn't be getting back up. Then she rifled through their pockets, taking their wallets and cell phones. She wiped her hands on her ruined coat and looked down at me. "Are you all right?" I felt her hand on my shoulder, but I shoved her away. I wasn't all right. I would never be all right again. 2 of her men grabbed me, shoving me into their van as another one of her associates hopped into the blood-stained panel van with the bodies and sped off. I sat there, numb, staring at my trembling hands. Anastasia handed me a thermos. "Drink this." I took a cautious sip. "Black coffee. You have sugar?" I mumbled, still in shock. She actually laughed. By the time we reached a warehouse, I was sober enough to feel afraid. Inside, they took me up in a freight elevator to an apartment. I kept my mouth shut as they spread dozens of photographs across the table. My stomach twisted. The photos weren't just of Lana and her 2 friends. There were more. At least 5 others, strangers, who had been following me for the past 2 weeks. "Who are you?" I demanded. Who the hell were they? Anastasia poured me another cup of coffee, this time sliding a small bowl of sugar toward me. "We work for Ukrainian intelligence." I nearly choked. "Ukrainian? But you're Asian." "Half," she corrected. I stared at her, waiting for more. Finally, she sighed. "Your late girlfriend wasn't actually named Lana. Her real name was Svetlana Perova. She and her friends worked for the FSB, the Russian intelligence agency." My blood ran cold. One of her associates, a serious-looking man named Artem, took over. "Your father is a target. Russia has developed thousands of bomb-carrying drones to use against Ukraine, but your father, He created the electronic countermeasures that will render them useless. The Russians plan to kidnap you, torture you, and use you as leverage to make him hand over the technology. Anastasia leaned against the table. That's why they attacked us outside the theater that night. And when you broke up with me, it actually helped us. It made you an easier target, so we were able to flush them all out. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had been bait. I looked at Anastasia. So I was just a job to you? She reached for my hand. At first, yes, but it turned into something more. A lot more. Artem clapped a hand on my shoulder. She hasn't shut up about you for weeks. You must be special. I felt my face heat up, but I was still conflicted. I had been raised a Quaker, a pacifist. Killing, even in self-defense, was never an option. And yet, Anastasia had saved my life. She had ended 6 men to do it. My entire belief system was crashing down around me. I thought back to all the philosophical debates I'd had in school, about nonviolence, about refusing to fight back, even at the cost of your own life. But now it all seemed so simple. It was kill or be killed. Them or us. A man tried to murder the woman I loved, but I got to him first. And the worst part? I didn't even feel guilty about it. Anastasia studied me carefully. I know what you're thinking. How are you feeling? I swallowed hard. I think I finally understand what my religion never did. Nonviolence is a noble idea, but it's not a suicide pact. She nodded. Artem glanced at his watch. As for the others in these photos, they were taken care of tonight. I tensed. So, will more come after me? Without a doubt. I buried my face in my hands. Fantastic. Anastasia's hand rested on my back. You have 2 choices. You can stay here and wait to die, or you can come with me. I looked up at her. Come with you where? She took my hand, squeezing it. You'll have full protection. A full scholarship at the Institute of Science. By the time you graduate, your father's work will be obsolete, and the Russians will have no reason to come after you. I barely registered the word scholarship. Live with you? I repeated dumbly. She smirked. You're an acquired taste, but you've grown on me. My head spun, but I already knew my answer. Okay, I'll go. Artem made a phone call. Minutes later, we were on the move. The airport's too dangerous, Anastasia explained. They'll be watching. Instead, we drove to the Long Beach harbor, boarding a cargo ship bound for somewhere. By morning, we were at sea. I stood on the deck, staring at the endless blue horizon. Anastasia stepped beside me. I hesitated, then put my arm around her waist. I love you. She turned, searching my face, then kissed me softly. I love you too, Terry. I froze. Terry? She smirked. What? I thought you hated that name. I let out a breath and pulled her closer. Not anymore. She motioned toward our 3 armed companions. And these are your pirates. I glanced at them, silent, deadly, loyal. My pirates. My life as Terrence was over. From now on, just call me Terry. Please share your thoughts in the comments section and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.